Real Sounds of Africa there to once again kick off our World Football phone-in. 08085 909 693 is the number to call if you'd like to join in. 08085 909 693. Always feels appropriate that we're talking Real Sounds of Africa when the Mark Gleeson, the oracle of African football, is with us. Our Springbokker Junior, as he's known. Mark, good morning.
Good morning, Dotun. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thanks very much. How is Cape Town nowadays?
It's kind of turning for the better. The summer is always a bit slow in arriving here, but we do have some nice days and still some wintry days. But yeah, life kicks on.
Yeah, it's a shame that they still haven't sorted out the telecommunications there and it fades in and out. Otherwise, I'd say, why don't you and I just have a chat for the next 2 hours and never mind that bloke in South America, you know what I mean?
Oh, is he on again? No,
unfortunately, yeah. He's always on. Can't get rid of him. He's been on here longer than I have. Can you believe that? It's coming up to 15 years, isn't it, Legendino? Tim Vickery in South America?
Coming up to 20 years.
Oh,
December
20 years.
1997.
Oh,
indeed,
my word. Oh, my word.
And that's Gleeson messing about. That's Gleeson deliberately talking quietly and then talking loudly. You didn't know he could vary his own voice like that, did you?
We now know. Thanks, sir. What are we going to do for the 20th anniversary?
I don't know. I mean,
get rid of him.
It's been a long time, hasn't it? Yeah, good point.
Yeah, well,
no, see, that was something, Mark. That was something for you to say in your very, very quiet voice. Not the loud one.
It came out loud and clear, though. Loud and clear.
So, are you saying, Tim, that every single Friday of your last 20 years is spoken for?
Well, it didn't start on Fridays. It started on a Monday morning.
No, we started on
it?
Sundays. Yeah,
or Monday morning.
Monday.
Monday morning is what was there, yeah.
Yeah, but every single one, apart from, I think we were off the air during the Iraq War and the odd time when there's been a terrorist outrage. Apart from that, we've been sitting beside the river watching the bodies of our enemies float by for a long, long time.
What cheeses me off, he's been doing it longer than me, Mark. I can never catch up with him. I can never.
So who was the original Dotun?
No, there was no original Dotun. Well, I suppose it was Richard Dallin, was it?
Yeah, there's no such thing as an original Dotun. He is an original. But we were very, very lucky with presenters because it started as just a 5-minute slot. And Richard Dallin, who was the presenter then, liked it, encouraged it, saw it, got a reaction, and so it grew and grew. Anita and came in and did a terrific job as we went to the transition to a phone-in, which at the time when they asked me about this was like 2002. I said, no, it ain't going to phone in. What are you? It's not going to work, you know. And here we are, all these years later. So what do I know?
If you were to award gold, silver, bronze, who would it be? Anita, Richard, Dotun, which order?
That's hard.
Oh,
you can't say that. You can't say that in public, mate. No, because I'd be too embarrassed to take the bronze, Tim. No, just leave it out. Leave it out, please.
Dotun Adebayo is the gold standard.
No, not at all. Listen, we're going to have to do something, and I'm going to put it up to listeners. You decide. So it's coming up to the 20th anniversary of the World Football phone in December. You decide what we should do here on 5 Live. It's entirely up to you. You can text me right now on 85058, email upallnight@bbc.co.uk, or come on air, actually, on 08085 909 693 and give us your thoughts. And also talk about Africa.
Can I make an early suggestion that the program is done from the hair salon in Rio, live?
I think that might work, actually. I think that might work. I think that's an early leader. Yeah, you asked for it, Tim. Well, there you go. We may as well see what our good money's being spent on.
Exactly. and get a trim at the time.
Yeah, well, why not? Hey, listen, it's up to you guys. 08085 909 693. And questions on African football and South American football generally. I know we're going to talk about, obviously, Sergio Aguero in just a moment. But after this one, this is great from John. And he wants me to ask the Springbokker Junior more about the details of this Malawi story. I think you might know the one I'm talking about. What is the going rate for trying to nobble a referee over in Malawi at the moment, Mark?
I haven't seen that one. In fact, you'd have to let me in a little bit. Dotun, is this someone paying off a ref again.
Yeah, well, 4 soccer referees in Malawi. They've been banned for life for match fixing after they received just $20 between them. That's shocking, isn't it?
Look, that's a fair amount. Yeah, fair amount of money in Malawi. But look, you know, it's been good to see actually over the last few years that there's been quite a bit of action taken across the continent against errant officials. You know, and of course the big story is the one in the World Cup with the referee from Ghana who's been banned for life, and they've ordered the replay of the game between South Africa and Senegal. And what actually happened there, which hasn't really come out in public, is that FIFA got this early warning betting division that monitors betting on matches, and there was a sudden spike in around about the 30th minute, just before the goal was scored. So it was obviously preordained, and it wasn't so much the fixing of the result; it was the fixing of certain moments in the match. There were 2 or 3 betting spikes out of Hong Kong and Singapore, which alerted FIFA to it, and they then, off their own bat, it wasn't based on the protest of any of the teams involved, investigated this referee and found him guilty of contriving the result between South Africa and Senegal in that World Cup qualifier in November last year. And that's going to be replayed again. Obviously, South Africa are very upset about it because they lose the points, but ultimately have accepted the explanation of FIFA and have agreed that they can't take the points from a match result that's manipulated in such a fashion. But you know, 10 years, 15 years ago, there was always the inference in African football that so many of these matches, be they domestic in the league, qualifiers in the Nations Cup tournament games themselves, were fixed, and no one was ever really taken to task. But we've had quite a lot of prosecutions across the continent over the last couple of years, and I think that's gratifying to see. That's progress, in my opinion.
Do you think that contributes, the fact that previously, at least, that people didn't necessarily believe the results or question the results in matches? Do you think that has contributed to, you know, a certain lack of interest across Africa in its domestic football and more interest in, say, the Premier League over here?
Perhaps. I mean, I think that is more sort of a quality perception that makes the Premier League so popular on the continent. I mean, I think that's just an appreciation of the quality of the players, the quality of the stadiums, the singing, and just visually. You know, visually, the English league is presented so well because it's so easy to film. You know, it's such a wonderful environment. Your grass is always so wonderfully green. I mean, it's all that rain that you have. But so it's a high quality product, and obviously any audience around the world, and Africans are no exception, appreciate that and so gravitate towards it. But I think the local leagues suffer. The detriment for the local leagues is more the fact that, you know, they pale in insignificance in comparison to the English league. Not so much because of the perceptions of corruption, although, you know, that does contribute to a lack of credibility. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's not difficult for a Malawian consumer or let's make a better example, a Kenyan consumer to understand that Arsenal versus Chelsea on a Sunday afternoon is a lot better than going just down the road to watch Gor Mahia take on Nakuru. You know, it's a bit of a no-brainer. So it is one of the real problems of African football. But I mean, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, Tim, a lot of people have been talking about Sergio Aguero because of his accident. He went to, and I'm not laughing about this at all, but ironically, it's nothing to do with football. Goes to Amsterdam to see a South American singer, pop star. He was honorary guest there.
Colombian.
Yeah, Colombian, that's it. And on the way back to the airport, he gets into an accident and he has hurt his ribs. He's going to be out in Manchester City's crucial match against Chelsea, amongst other things. But what's been the reaction in Argentina and South America generally about this? Rishi wants to know if there are instances of footballers being ruled out of matches for non-footballing related questions. But apart from anything else, you know, generally this idea of a footballer paid a lot of money, and part of that money, I imagine, is to make sure he doesn't go and ride motorcycles like I do and things like that, to stay, you know, quite fit and away from danger. And he gets himself into this. Not saying that he was expecting to be in danger, but nevertheless going off and getting to this kind of thing. Has there been any reaction to it?
Well, yeah, because, all right, you're all talking about Man City and Chelsea, but over here, and we've got an absolutely massive game next Thursday, Argentina against Peru in World Cup qualification. And Argentina in real doubts about whether they're going to make the World Cup. So it's a huge game. And Aguero, well, he didn't get on the field in Argentina's last game when they needed a goal against Venezuela, and he went all the way across the Atlantic just to sit on the bench. The logical choice, I think, especially with the form that he's been in and the lack of time to train, and the fact that if you ask Messi who Messi would like to play with, I think he'd have said Aguero. So I think it's more than likely that Aguero would have started that game against Peru on Thursday, but he ain't going to start it now. So that was the news in Argentina, that he's out of that one, and possibly, I mean, they went originally with 2 months out, which we'll have to see how that goes. There's a possibility that Argentina might come fifth and have a playoff against New Zealand, and he might well be out for that as well. So obviously the view from here is very much on how it affects the national team, how it affects kind of top of the table clash against Chelsea. Well, I think he's allowed to go to a gig on his day off. And you're saying, well, yeah, but it's in another country. But Europe's so small, and had this been in London, it's just as far away, really, isn't it, as as Manchester to Amsterdam. So, to be honest, I can't see this as a major issue. I would have thought that he would be allowed to do that. He's got a day off. It's Thursday. The fact that he's gone. How far long's the flight from Manchester to Amsterdam? It's not very far. It's one of those where as soon as you're taking off, you're already clicking into to come down again. So I don't really see that as being a major issue. Had it happened in London, there wouldn't be such a fuss. But
no, sure.
To me, the fact that it's in a different country doesn't really make a great deal of difference.
In fact, this is the Manchester City manager, Pep Guardiola, saying that he has no problem with Sergio Aguero being in Amsterdam, as he confirmed the striker suffered a broken rib in that car accident on Thursday. The 29-year-old Argentine was on his way in a taxi to the airport after watching the singer Maluma perform when the accident happened. Anyway, Pep says when his players are off duty, he expects them to enjoy their free time.
It's okay. That is the most important thing. So after that, to recover as soon as possible.
And when you say as soon as possible, obviously he's not here now. He would have been training this morning. So for the foreseeable future, he can't play.
No, he cannot play tomorrow. And after international break, maybe was selected in Argentina. He cannot go there. And we will see. I don't know the answers, the doctor, so we have the first impression what he has is broken the rib. But exactly how many days will be off, so I don't know right now. I think that the day off is for to be happy. I want the players to be happy. Always I am a manager, I don't like to train every day because I think the players have to rest mentally, physically, and they can enjoy their lives. And I want my players to have fun.
Yeah, and Tim, this is the second time that I remember that Sergio Aguero has injured himself domestically, for want of a better phrase. Do you remember when he got his little kid, one of those little children's motor cars, and he injured himself a few years back? Do you remember that? I mean, we are.
I do.
Well, in this case, and I'm not saying, it's an accident. I get that. I totally get that. But I'm saying it's an accident that arguably could affect the outcome of who wins the league this year, because he's been scoring for fun for Manchester City. And they've got some rival contenders on the other side of this huge city, albeit in Salford, if you see what I mean, or Trafford, whatever they call it. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that Sergio Aguero being away for even 2 or 3 matches can make all the difference. Do you know what I mean? So really, players.
Well, it's big news for all right. I mean, he won't be celebrating it, but it's terrific news for Gabriel Jesus. Who when he at the start of this season, I think he would have thought that he was going to be a striker, and he's lost that position so far. And he cut a very sorry figure when he was substituted early in the second half on Tuesday. And I saw this and made sure that he had a word with him as Gabriel Jesus made his way off the field. Well, now opportunity is knocking for Gabriel Jesus on that amount of money, and you got a squad with that kind of depth. Then an accident or an injury to one is the opportunity for another. And that they have got so much strength in depth. And I was watching the game on Tuesday, and there was a moment in the game when City were attacking down the left side, and the commentator said Sané, and I just couldn't help myself. Yesterday my life was filled with rain. Sané, it's one of I can't understand why Man City supporters are not singing Sané. One so true, I love you. But now, Sané has a chance
because it's a television
step
advert for some money lenders. That's why.
Is it?
Yeah,
no,
you see, you've been away
it's a
too
song
long,
by Bobby
mate.
Hebb and Georgie Fame.
I know,
That's
but
what I know
things have changed, mate. You've been away too long. I keep telling you that. Anyway, Tim, thanks for that. We have got Cleo in Aldershot with us. Good morning, Cleo.
Good morning, Dotun. Good morning, Tim. Good morning, Mark. Dotun, 20th anniversary. Morning. You should combine it with a 4-hour phone-in, and the World Cup draw is on the 1st of December.
Oh, that's a good one.
4-hour phone-in World Cup draw. Okay, yeah.
Talking about World Cup, for Tim, about Peru, I saw them May 2014. They played England at Wembley. England played well to the World Cup in Brazil, and they were rubbish. England trounced all over them. And for Mark, Ghana, likelihood not qualifying, and the coach hasn't picked the Ayew brothers, who play, Jordan and Andre, play for West Ham and Swansea, respectively. He's completely lit them out of squad. And they're going to really struggle to qualify against Uganda, because Egypt's are running away with the group, and so are Nigeria with their group.
Yeah.
How does that look?
Mark?
Well, look, this what's happened with Ghana came before. What happened with Ghana in terms of their poor World Cup qualifying form happened really before Kwesi Appiah took over again as coach. I mean, he's only been back for the last 2 games. They drew the first one in at home against the Congo, and then the Ayew brothers suddenly both developed little injuries and didn't go for the second match in the Congo a couple of days later, which Ghana won 5-1. So without the 2 of them, they won their last match away from home 5-1, giving themselves still a little remote chance of qualifying. So to be honest with you, I wasn't surprised that he left them out. I think they've been behaving like spoilt brats within the Ghana national team setup, and he's a coach who could have less egos and more willing bodies in a rather difficult situation. So I think he's done the right thing for Ghana, and I think that will show in this next match, which I think they're going to win. Keep themselves with a bit of a chance going into the last game.
I know you tear your hair out, don't you, Mark, with regards to, well, particularly the younger of the Ayew brothers, and it's frustrating football, not just for you, but for Swansea at the moment as well. What's the difference between the 2 brothers, essentially? Andre Ayew, who comes on as reserve for West Ham now, does seem to be more disciplined as a footballer. And his brother, just, I don't know whether it comes across as slightly flippant, if I can put it that way, when he plays.
Yes, and selfish in a way. I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way, but you do want strikers to be selfish and self-absorbed and with one thing in mind, and that being scoring goals. But you've also got to have a bit of a footballing brain. I think that's possibly the difference between the 2. I see Andre Ayew is a player with a great vision, and he's got a lot of his father's genes in him. Abedi Pele was such a wonderful footballer all round. Jordan Ayew is just a sort of a greedy striker, but who could be a lot more effective. And I say greedy striker in a good way, but he could be so much more effective if he saw the game around him as well. He's got a wonderful work rate. He really. is a difficult guy to defend against. We saw that at the Nations Cup in Gabon. He really did give defences trouble. But actually, you could just let him go through because he's going to make the wrong decision, put the ball wide of goal anyway. But they really are, for two brothers, distinctly different footballers. I mean, the way Dede or Andre glides around the pitch is very reminiscent of the way his father played, whereas Jordan is this real sort of bustling, fighting, and then ultimately poor decision-making striker.
Peter in Glasgow says, Tim, this is an odd request, he acknowledges. Can you choose a South American football match from this weekend's fixtures for me to make an artwork about? For Peter in Glasgow to make an artwork about. He promises to tweet the results out next Saturday morning. Is there a fixture that you'd like to see an artwork of?
I'd like a bit more information about what kind of school of art our friend Peter is. I'll tell you what. I'll come back after the 3:30 news. I'll see. Okay. I'll peruse around the fixtures and I'll see if we've got something really artistic that jumps out.
But you think it will make a difference whether he's a surreal or a Dadaist
Well,
artist?
I think so. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yes,
or a pop artist, maybe. What do you know about all these different forms of art, mate? I'm going to test you later on. Don't try and be clever with me, mate. Vickery in the back, pay attention for goodness sake. Anyway, this is from Bill in Queens in New York. He says, I spend way too much time looking at football stadia on Google Maps and recently learned that Estudiantes de La Plata in Argentina play in a very modern stadium. Is this unique in Argentina? Can the Legendino give other examples of modern stadia in South America, excluding the Brazil World Cup venues? Excluding the Brazil World Cup venues.
They want to go back to they're remodeling their original stadium, and they want to go back there, and the stadium that one in La Plata. They couldn't use it this week because the Who did a gig there a few days ago, so that they couldn't use that modern one that was built, I think, 2007. They don't seem to like that very much. Well, obviously Brazil has that wave of modern stadiums for 2014. Venezuela has some modern stadiums for the 2007 COP. It's only 10 years old. There are one or two around. Cali, Deportivo Cali in Colombia have a new stadium. Peña in Uruguay have a new stadium. The problem with both of those is the plague of stadiums that are massively outside the city centre, which I really hate. You know, I want, for me, one of the most vital things for a stadium is transport links. You know, so the out-of-town stadium that's hard to get to is a plague. But quite a lot of the new ones in South America are being built on that basis.
08085 909 693. Number to call if you'd like to join us for this morning's World Football Phoning. Give us a call. Talking football in Africa and South America and players from over there playing in our leagues. Also asking you, how should we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the World Football Phoning coming up in December?
This is BBC 5 Live, available on the BBC iPlayer radio app. Up all night with Dotun Adebayo.
And the World Football Phoning this morning, we're talking Africa and South America with the Springbok Junior, who's in Cape Town, Mark Gleeson, and the Legendino, Tim Vickery, who is in Rio, and talking about African and South American football respectively and players from over there playing in our league. So if you'd like to join us, we'd love you to join us. The number to call is 08085 909 693. That's 08085 909 693. And gentlemen, we've got lots of suggestions as to what we should do for the 20th anniversary. I'd love a live commentary from a fixture somewhere in South America, and from Dotun and Tim and everyone else who's a regular. In fact, make it less of a commentary and more of a load of intelligent lovers of the beautiful game, having a chat about a match while it develops in front of them, says Jonathan. Sean in Cumbria wants to know if your puppy, Tim, by now, of course, is lion-sized, so no stroking his head as a certain cricketer did in Namibia. And if
lion, I love that in a Welsh accent.
Yeah,
lion,
lion rather than loin for the 20th year celebration. Anyway. Don't like that at all. Do I not like that? To quote a late, great, departed football coach. Anyway, for the 25th anniversary, we could vote for the best ever South American team versus the rest of the world 11. Amandeep says 25th anniversary, we should get all the previous presenters to come on for one night. Michael in Middlesbrough, I'll come on to that in a second. Richard Oxford says maybe for the 25th anniversary you get... No, hang on, we'll come on to that in a second. This is from Ian. He says Dotun has been on a long time and an original. Tim, as you say, he'll be on the next series of Antiques Roadshow to be valued. I'd say he's worth a 4-figure prize, the 4 figures being £67.50. Thank you. I didn't think I'd get that much, actually. So I'm not... Anyway, he does a great job as long as he doesn't talk about food. Here's a serious question for you both, from Richard in Oxford. If your regions were to play each other, he wants you to set up a match between your respective regions, Africa and South America. Who would be in either of your starting 11s? Is that a lot to ask at this time of the morning?
So presumably you'd
South
want
American
the best
11.
African 11, right?
Yeah, what an Africa 11 versus a South America 11, but as chosen by you, who would be in your starting 11?
Jordan Ayew.
I don't think his lot should turn up. I think
give him a chance.
I think they should run away.
Give him a chance.
I don't think they've got a chance.
Well, hang on. There's a fighting
They're
words.
going to pour
from you
humiliation.
Them is fighting
themselves.
words. Them is fighting words. Okay, and you, the one who said Africa would win the World Cup at some point. So why not this time? So let's start from goalkeeper. Let's start from the back going forward.
Well, just to give Mark some thinking time. There's an African influence here. Our friend Peter there, who wants to do an art about a game this weekend. I've come up with one. I think this game will lend itself to a number of schools of art, and the venue I think is one that Mark will remember from the World Cup. The game is this weekend in Brazil. It's Bahia against Curitiba.
Yeah.
Now, first, you've got a great venue. You've got the stadium in Salvador. It's my favourite of the World Cup stadiums. I think Mark was there during the World Cup. It's a gorgeous stadium. And just behind it, there's this kind of lake thing. I think they call it a dike. It's just beautifully scenic, and there's some hills. It will lend itself to some impressionism, I think. Salvador is Brazil at its most African. So you've got that. But the visiting team, Curitiba, is from a city in the south. It's a team with a strong German influence. In fact, the nickname of the club is the White Thighs because they take their clothes off, put on the short trousers, and look how pale-skinned they are. So you've got a game there with a beautiful setting in Brazil at its most African, and the visiting team is Brazil at its most European.
That's a good
and
picture.
I think that lends itself to an artistic experiment.
That is definitely a good fixture, and don't say we didn't try. So, Peter, remember what you said. You got to stick to your word. Peter in Glasgow, you're going to tweet your artwork. So you've got the German White Thighs of Brazil versus the Africans. Yeah? Okay. You know what to do. So let's get back onto this best of Africa 11 as chosen by either of you. Or by, what am I saying? Either of you. As chosen by Mark versus the best of South America 11 as chosen by Tim. Who wants to start first?
Well, I'm short of a goalkeeper, but I'm going to go...
See, it hasn't started very well for Africa, has it?
Yeah.
Okay, look, I'll tell you what. Look,
I'll let him. I'll let him pick two goalkeepers. I think he's going to need them.
You're taking the mickey now. I'm going to give you both time to think about this. Just bear with me. Have a little bit of thinking time whilst we speak to Barry in Southend-on-Sea. Good morning, Barry.
Good morning, Dotun, and really a question for Mark. Although I live in Southend-on-Sea, I'm lucky enough I do spend January to March every year living in Cape Town.
Oh, you're lucky.
You're very
lucky. Since I retired, the locals call us swallows. I regularly go to safari. We regularly go to Sahara Park, watch cricket. We watch rugby. Mind you, I'm wearing my Spurs shirt while I'm there.
Oh.
I've never got around to watching football, but the thing is, at the moment, I'm due back in January. There's the most unbelievable drought going on in Cape Town. It's a surprise a lot of people here don't really realise how bad it is. How can sport continue? Because as far as I'm aware, the use of water for watering pitches, be it cricket, rugby, football, is probably stopped. Can sport really continue?
Well, I suppose we wait to see, and we wait with some trepidation. The dam levels are falling. The restrictions are now up to what they call level 5.
Level 5, yeah.
I don't know what the exact number of litres is, but I mean, the faucets are still sort of rolling with water, and I still see quite a big wastage around the city as I drive around. Sort of water rolling, going down the street, etc. So I'm not sure how they're going to deal with it at the stadiums. In fact, it's a very good question, and I'm going to go and get it answered for you, because I'm going in a couple of hours' time to the big derby, which you are missing, between Ajax Cape Town and Cape Town City.
Is that at the Greenpoint Stadium?
No, at the Cape Town Stadium. Well, Greenpoint
Stadium. Yeah, Greenpoint. Yeah. So I don't live very far from there.
Yeah, the old, but you do know the Greenpoint Stadium existed before the old stadium.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah, because they had a great market there on a Sunday.
And they've knocked that down, but now they've built a very smart alternate stadium next to it, which they use as a training ground.
I've been in the big Cape Town Stadium, but not to watch football. I've watched a concert there. It is an incredible stadium. But how can you water the pitches when we can't even refill swimming pools?
I will get an answer for you, and then if you perhaps let us know your contact details, and make sure that you have a proper Cape Town experience and come watch some football in January, rather than mucking about with those other minor sports.
Mind you, I am wearing my Spurs shirt at Sahara Park.
Yeah, and we'll sort out the dress code as well.
Of course, you have to sort that out.
Tim will fully agree with me.
It's actually a really interesting question, actually, because the wider context to this is how natural weather conditions affect football. Famously, everybody here knows that picture of John Motson when it's a snowed over ground and, there's no way that football was going to be played. He's stuck there in his sheepskin coat. But obviously, every different continent, every different country will have its particular natural weather conditions that affect the game. Here now, the only thing that really ever stops play in the UK, I suppose, is ice and sometimes fog. Very occasionally, it's fog.
That's right.
But I imagine in South America and in Africa, there will be other conditions. Drought is one.
Floodlight failure.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about natural conditions.
Yeah. Well, that sometimes is natural. That's because of very, very heavy rain. Waterlogged pitches. Yeah. And rain here can be absolutely torrential.
But at the moment,
that suspended lots of games in Uruguay and Argentina recently. And also, another consequence of torrential rain can be knocking out the electricity system and knocking out the floodlights.
And Mark? I was just thinking, which other conditions, apart from drought, affects football there?
Yeah, again, bad weather. I mean, you might remember this. I'm not sure. It's a good 20 years ago now. I was the television commentator that day, but we had a game where lightning struck the pitch and several players got knocked over. It was, in fact, and CNN made it their play of the day, somewhat bizarrely. But it was that was a day of nature at its absolute horrific and majestic at the same time, and it came out as a bolt out of the blue. I actually saw this weekend there was one of these American NFL games where there was thunder and lightning, and they sort of try and get the crowd to vacate their seats and seek safety. And people only started moving when the rain came along with the lightning. But I mean, it's so dangerous, really. And oftentimes here we have stoppages for lightning where the referee takes the players off and they come back sort of 10, 20 minutes later. It can be quite majestic.
I do remember that lightning strike, actually, because thankfully, as I recall, nobody actually died as a result of it. But, virtually all the players on the pitch just collapsed, didn't they?
Yeah. And the one team had a Brazilian coach, in fact, and he hadn't been in the country very long, and he was gone before you could say, strike lightning. He was his hair was standing on end. It looked like a comic caricature, really.
Yeah. But you can think of all the other conditions that could stop play, like earthquakes, for example, or the hurricane that we've just seen rage across the Caribbean and the southern United States. And I imagine in Africa, one of the problems, or is it a problem for African footballers when we would say that, it's just too hot in the midday sun for Mad Dogs and Englishmen. But is it a problem? Does it ever get too hot to play for Africans?
Yeah, it does.
Really?
It does. I'll give you a small. Well, it's a small example, but here in South Africa, where it's not as hot as it is elsewhere on the continent, they switch the kickoff time of matches as summer unfolds from 3 to 3:30. Just that extra half an hour does help. But I've been to a game in Chad. It was a World Cup qualifier, South Africa against Chad in N'Djamena, and we knew it was going to be hot, and obviously for journalistic purposes and for a fair amount of fun, had a whole pile of thermometers with us, and it was well over 40. I think it was 41.5. And that was incredible. I mean, how they played that game and how the players managed to run was beyond me. And it had this hot wind sort of blowing in your face. It's like standing next to a hairdryer, or blowing a hairdryer into your face. It was absolutely incredible.
And we won here again because we had a 42-degree day in Cape Town 3 years ago.
Yeah, well, hopefully you weren't playing football. That Spurs
no, I wasn't.
shirt
I could barely go out in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember playing five-a-side once. Usually the five-a-side games that I played on a Sunday morning, we'd clear the pitch if there was snow. We'd be the only ones clearing the pitch with shovels and everything. Literally, that company that runs those five-a-side, they'll give you shovels and say, clear it off if you want to. We'll play in that. There was one time it was so hot. I mean, we started thinking, hang on, this is a health hazard. And we forced ourselves to take breaks every sort of 15 and 20 minutes. But you couldn't find any shade. That was it. We'd all sort of collapse on the side of the five-a-side thing. Difficult to get up after that as well, once you take a break. Wasn't there a time there in South America as well, Tim, when there were hailstones the size of golf balls? I seem to remember. Wasn't that South American phenomenon?
Yeah, that's the weather can really, the weather is almost biblical at times. And I remember experiencing an earthquake. I was in Peru doing the 2005 World Under-17 Cup. And it was the same day, in fact, that on the flight, I found out why you have to wear your seatbelt when you take off, because the pilot aborted the flight because he thought that a bird had been swallowed in the engine. So he slammed on the brakes. And we were all right, we stopped. And, slammed on the brakes.
I say you're still on the ground?
To abort. Yeah, in order to abort takeoff.
Okay.
And loads of people were shaken. Some of the FIFA Blazers, they got off then. They wouldn't continue with the flight. So, but we continued with the flight and arrived in the city. And then that night we had an earthquake, which it was on the Richter scale, it was relatively minor. There were deaths, but only about 4 or 5. But when the floor beneath your feet turns to jelly, my God, that's something I will never ever forget. And there are parts of South America, thankfully not the part where I live, where it's going to happen. And Chile has really suffered with earthquakes. Peru has really suffered with earthquakes, and maybe one a decade or one every 25 years you get a really, really big one. Absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. Thanks for the call, Barry, and really good thoughts actually coming out of that conversation. Trevor is with us near Houston in Texas, which has suffered all sorts of weather problems with regards to the hurricane. Anyway, I hope everybody, your close loved ones are all safe and well. Anyway, Trevor.
Yes, doing fine. We talked a couple of weeks ago. I helped my coworker out, but my house was fine from the hurricane.
Oh, yes, of course. We did talk, yeah.
Yes.
Well, good to speak to you again anyway. I'm glad everything's all right with you. Well, go ahead. You've got a question for Mark.
Yes, Latif Blessing plays for Sporting Kansas City and scored an important goal in the U.S. Open Cup, which is similar to the FA Cup, but obviously not as prestigious. I was wondering if he had any opinion on Latif and his time in Ghana before coming over to the States.
No, I haven't seen him play. I know that he is one of several Ghanaians in the MLS that they've been looking at for the national team. In fact, they called up one called David Akram, who I think is from Montreal. I stand under correction, for the last World Cup qualifier. But my understanding about Blessing is he's still fairly young, although they do know about him in Ghana because he's one of the few that came into the MLS from the Ghanaian league, as opposed to sort of being having come through the high school or the college system. Many Ghanaians get bursaries to go over and play either high school football and then followed up with college, or go directly from high school in Ghana to college. So they have been looking at players from the MLS to strengthen their squad. But and they are amongst the few African countries who actually do cast an eye across the pond, because most of them look for their players in Europe rather than across in America. So I think it's quite a positive development, and it's perhaps a little bit of kudos as well for the growing international appeal of the MLS as well, that Ghana would deign to look there for players of Ghanaian nationality to bolster their national side.
But there's quite a history of that, though, I'd have thought, since Freddie Adu, remember, Trevor, infamously, I suppose, was drafted to the MLS at a very young age, but Ghana was the destination, wasn't it?
Yeah, but Freddie Adu was an American he was born in Ghana, but he was a kid when he went across with his mom, and so he came through the American, and he was American junior international and played for the USA. So he was never on Ghana's radar until they read about him as this phenomenon that's already been picked by the American junior system. But look, the Ghanaian migration into the US has been massive over the last 2 decades, and you can see it now reflected in the names of many of the juniors who play for the American national side. It's amazing to see how many players of with a Nigerian or a Ghanaian surname feature in their junior national sides, as it is when you watch gridiron football. Then pops up an occasional Nigerian name every now and then, or particularly in college ball as well. It's always it's good to see the Africans colonising gridiron football as well.
It's good to hear the motorcycle in the background, but where was it coming from? Was it in the United States, in South America, or Africa? That
was
definitely not. Definitely not in Africa.
That was a Rio motorcycle. Darlington Nagbe. I presume he fits into that. He plays for the US senior level, and every time I've seen that name, I thought, well, yeah. I wonder where he's from originally.
Do you know about him, Trevor? Darlington Nagbe?
Yeah, I know. Probably he's a good player, but since he doesn't play for my local team, Eastern Dynamo, I don't know him all too well, actually.
Well, hang on. It doesn't work the football doesn't work like that. You've got to know the other players as well, the opposition. You've always got to know what the enemy have got up their sleeve. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I suppose so. I'm just not a hardcore fan. I'm just I probably listen more to football podcasts than actually watch games, which I'm sure is a shock and horror to most people.
No, but, not at all. Not at all. You can consume it any which way you want to consume it. It's not shock and horror. It may be shock and awe, but not horror. Anyway, Trevor, it's always a pleasure. Speak to us any time. Give us a call. And we've got a great podcast, as you know, as well, yeah? You do know that. Okay. And, by the way, John in Salford is saying, Mark, Africa's top 11, they all play for Liverpool, don't they?
I've got in the one that I'm putting together now. I've definitely got Mane as one of my strikers. I'm not so sure about Salah, where I'm going to fit him in, because I'm just juggling it around at the moment. I've got about 7 strikers at the moment.
I know. Maybe you could fit Salah in goal, because you're looking for a goalie, aren't you? May as well use a striker. Sometimes, when you're playing five-a-side, the striker has to go in goal. Everybody's got to take their turn in goals. So Salah in goal. Do you want to go with that?
No, I've solved the goalkeeping problem in my mind now.
Okay,
yeah.
So who's the goalie? We're still trying to get...
My goalkeeper is going to be a chap by the name of Kennedy Mwini, who's won over 100 caps for Zambia, plays for the African champions Mamelodi Sundowns, and saved 2 penalties just a couple of weekends ago against Algeria in World Cup qualifiers. He's about 35 now, and he has been a top quality keeper on the continent for a good 15 years. He really has had a wonderful career.
You notice how Tim has suddenly gone quiet. By the way, listeners, in case you don't know what's happening.
Listen, I thought in the beginning when this was brought up, I thought maybe 2. We'd give them 2-0, But the more I think about it, as this team is put together, it's going to be 5, Dotun.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, 5 to Africa against South Africa. Yeah. Hang on, Tim. Let the man finish.
They're not going to make the game anyway. They're going to wrap their taxis around poles on their way to the stadium.
We ought not to laugh, but I think boom boom ends that one. But
you lot are not going to take the pitch because you're going to be arguing about bonuses in the dressing room.
Of course, we're going to argue. Come on. Oh, by the way, oops, the referee suddenly got biased, didn't he? He went down on one side or the other. I forgot about that.
I think you said we.
I know. Yeah, of course. The old African in me came out all of a sudden. I didn't ask for it. For goodness sake. When you talk about rowing in Africans, that's part of the course, mate. Anyway, okay, so we've got a goalie for Africa. In case listeners don't know what we're talking about, one of our listeners has asked both Mark and Tim to draw up an 11, a first 11 from a starting 11 from their continents to play each other, you see. So Mark started off with Kenzie Mwini in goal. Did you say he's a Zambian?
He's Kennedy Mwini is a Zambian. I'm going. If we're going to do this sort of one position at a time over the next hour or so, I'm going Aurier from the Ivory Coast, the new Tottenham man at right back, but he gets the nod just in front of Toby Adebayo Rowling. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Oh, I'm glad. I like that.
Also on the right.
I like that. South America's in trouble, mate. They're in trouble. Okay. Don't worry about that. He gets a nod just ahead of it. Let's get your goalkeeper from South America first, Tim. Who are you going to match Kennedy and Weenie with?
We haven't considered anyone yet from the Irish League, although if there are any South Americans making outstanding performances there, they may well be considered. Yeah, goalkeeping, I have to say, is perhaps not our strongest suit at the moment, and so we've gone with Ospina. Of Arsenal and Colombia. Although, to be honest, I don't think we're going to need him very much. I think he can just take a deck chair and read.
We'll come back to that. And what about right back then? We've got right back for him. By the way, Mark, I've been told that you don't get any marks for pandering to the referee with that Toby Adebayo Rowling, by the way. So I'll have to give you a yellow card for that one. Reluctantly, as you understand.
Would $20 help, Todd?
I come cheap, mate, but not that cheap. Yeah, not that cheap. It would help, though. It would help. So, Tim, who's the right back for South America then?
Right back, well, I decided we got so much attacking talent that I wanted a little bit of balance there. So I didn't go for Daniel Alves, who is much better going forward than he is defensively. I went with Santiago Arias of Colombia and PSV, who nearly joined Swansea in the transfer window, who's good going forward but tighter defensively than Daniel Alves. So Arias of Colombia.
Colombia, okay. We'll come back some more to get your other positions very shortly. This is, I think it's brewing up to be quite a contentious competition between South America and Africa. Winner takes all, as it were, and it's Mark Gleeson's first 11 from Africa versus Tim's first 11 from South America. I do denote a tone of disrespect coming from the South Americans.
Yes.
They're looking at those Africans thinking,
yes. He can be scornful
of course
and contemptuous with just three letters.
Talk about
it's
contemptuous. Talk about
Yellow
contemptuous.
card, ref. Yellow card.
Exactly. I'm getting close to offering him one or lashing one on top of him. But talk about scornful. You lot are the scornful. Have a little bit of respect for the Africans now. Just because they haven't won a World Cup, but you lot think that you own the flipping thing. No, have some respect, please. So, I can't wait to hear the rest of them. It's going to be interesting, very interesting. Yeah, quite a lot to get through for this hour of the World Football Podium, because not only will we take all your questions on football in Africa and South America and players from over there playing in our leagues, but also we have this vexed issue of, and this was from one of our listeners in Oxford, Richard, who said he would like to hear who both of our pundits would have as their starting 11 from their varying continents. So, Mark Gleeson's starting 11 from Africa versus Tim Vickery's starting 11 from South America. Vickery thinks he's won it already. He started off with Ospina in goal and Santiago Arias as right back, whereas Mark Gleeson's gone for Kennedy Mwini from Zambia in goal and as right back Oreo as well. Was that you laughing there, Tim?
No, it wasn't. Getting a little bit worried. But I was just thinking there that I think Gleeson's coming up with a bins never was's and never will be's.
Okay. Gleeson, do you want to tell us who your left back would be then?
My left back is Baba Rahman, who is just on his way back now from a very bad cruciate ligament injury suffered at the Nations Cup. Chelsea, I'm not sure if he's still on the Chelsea books, but he's mostly made his name in the Bundesliga. Very young, exciting, marauding left back who is going to poke some rather large holes into that flabby South American defence.
Yeah, of course he is. Of course. Which country is he from?
He's from Ghana.
From Ghana. Okay, Tim, left back for you?
Yeah, I went with Marcelo of Brazil. It worries me a little bit. Gleeson might get at us there. Marcelo is, as an attacking left back, he's as good as they come. But defensively, he's perhaps not the tightest, and he can be a little bit hot-headed. So I went with Marcelo, but we'll be sitting down and having a chat with him before the game.
Is he still at Real Madrid?
That's where he's still at Real Madrid. He's injured at the moment, but he's still at Real Madrid.
Okay. Yeah, but you can have a chat with him to not maraud up front too much then.
Well, just to guard his moment. We've got so much attacking talent that, we're not dependent on him bombing forward all the time. Yeah. As the great Cesar Luis Minotti said, the Argentina coach in '78, if the fullback goes forward during a game 5 times, he'll have the element of surprise 5 times. He'll never have the element of surprise because they'll be waiting for him. So you're going to have to pick his moments. He's not going to get wound up by some of the gamesmanship and some of the heavy tackling that those Africans have come up with. He's going to retain his cool in the face of provocation, and I think he'll do very well for us. Okay, and don't forget to have a word with him about that haircut as well, because if you're going to go for David Luiz as centre half, you've got a problem. We're not. Oh, you don't know yet. Think about it before you go. Okay. No, I've thought about that one. I didn't have to think about that one very long.
For a few years. Yeah. He's doing all right actually at the moment. So what about centre halves from Africa? Where would you go with that, Mark?
The best centre half by far is Kalidou Koulibaly, who plays for Napoli and Senegal. You might have read about him fairly extensively in the British press in the transfer windows. He's always on the radar of the big sides. I think he's going to cost too much. He is just a man mountain at the back there, so he's going to just basically stand all over those South American strikers. And then alongside him, I would put the Juventus and Moroccan centre back Benatia. So those are my Koulibaly and Benatia as my 2 centre backs.
How about for you, Tim? Are you going for 2 centre backs, or how are you going to play it?
Oh yeah. No, we're going for a back 4. Our 2 centre backs, we're going for a kind of youth and experience type combination. Marquinhos of Brazil, of Paris Saint-Germain and Brazil, calm, wise beyond his years, and quick.
Who was that?
Because Marquinhos.
Marquinhos. Okay.
Marquinhos of Paris Saint-Germain and Brazil.
Yeah.
Alongside Diego Godin of Uruguay and Atletico Madrid, who's been around the block, knows it all, can do it all. If those Africans, if they want to play hard, Diego Godin will play harder. If they want to play classy, Diego Godin will do that as well, and he'll get us some goals at set pieces.
What was that?
He'll probably be our captain, I think.
Yeah. What was that?
I said, don't worry, Dotun. I'd never heard of them either.
Why don't the pair of you go and talk about Juventus to your heart's content?
Don't worry, mate. Don't worry. Just don't take the mickey out of Juventus. Yeah, Juventus or Juventus, whatever you want to call it.
Didn't you watch the Paris Saint-Germain Bayern Munich game in midweek?
No, I didn't. No, why?
Well, Gleeson, really.
Oh, is that where Diego Godin was showing his skills?
No, it was Marquinhos.
I actually watched Diego Godin duff it against Chelsea. That was the one I watched on Wednesday. On Tuesday, I watched Napoli playing against Feyenoord.
Okay.
Your fella Koulibaly did all right, did he?
He did, along with Goulam, the Algerian who plays next to him. They managed to give Feyenoord a penalty, but
let's not exchange digs.
Saved it.
Let's not exchange digs. At least not to have got the full 11. Okay. So we're going into midfield now. Where are you going with your midfield players, Mark? Where would you go with that?
because my team is so attacking, it's a 4-3-3. So I'm only going for 3 midfielders. I feel historically, given the injustice dealt to the Africans, that I should claim a player who's been nicked from us. In N'Golo Kante, but I'm not going to do that because
of course you can.
There'll be howls of derision.
Referee.
N'Golo Kante knows that he wants to play for an Africa all his own.
Exactly. But to be strictly fair and to make it a team of African internationals only, that's where I would put Naby Keita, the player from Guinea. I'd have creativity in the form of Hakim Ziyech, who plays for Ajax and for Morocco. He's a maverick, fabulous on the ball, does no other work. It spends most of his time arguing with the referee, which is also one of our tactics.
Of course, of course it is.
But capable of those sublime moments of magic. So
he won't be arguing with this referee. He'll be agreeing with you, giving you everything.
Look, just blame yourself.
We need someone to find out where we deposit the $20, and then Victor Moses on the right.
Okay, yeah, Victor Moses on the right. So who are you going for in midfield then, Tim?
Right, we're going for a 4-2-3-1 formation. So we've got 2 kind of out-and-out midfielders. And one
defensive midfielders.
Defensive midfielder, really. No, I mean, I guess best instincts.
Scared now. It's going to be 6-0.
I didn't go with Javier Mascherano. I'm a huge admirer of Javier Mascherano, but age is beginning to catch up with him just a little bit. What he's now 33. Yeah. So instead, I went with Casemiro as my holding midfielder, Real Madrid and Brazil.
Yeah.
But we've got Mascherano on the bench there if we need him. And beside him, as a mixed midfielder, someone who's going to do a little bit of everything, including charge round in a blizzard of rage, is Arturo Vidal of Chile and Bayern Munich. So we've got Casemiro to hold and Vidal to do a little bit of everything. So that's my 2 men in the engine room.
Okay.
So there's 2 car accident players in your side already.
Well, it seems like a car crash, a complete car crash, this South American team. Don't worry about that. Okay, up front then for Africa, who are you going with?
I'm going with Mane, with Salah, and with Aubameyang.
Mane, Aubameyang, and who?
And Salah.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, okay.
Good point,
Yeah.
good point. Who? Good point. Good point, well made. Who?
Who
And who?
No, hang on, don't be cheeky now. So what was that, Mark?
I say we've got to put an Egyptian in for the diving and the rolling.
Of course. He's done quite well for Liverpool this season, you know, so I don't know if he's going to need the diving business. But the Brazilians are good at diving as well. Who are you going for up front, Tim?
Well, a line of 3 behind our centre forward, and this is where he really starts worrying. Because the line of 3 is Alexis Sanchez from wide right, Messi in the middle, and Neymar from wide left.
Oh, gosh, man.
Well, Napoli as he wants, but that line of 3, you know, that line of 3 is going to do him some serious damage, and we haven't even got to the centre forward yet.
Go on then, go on.
Is it Suarez
it's
or
Luis Suarez,
Aguero?
It's Suarez, who's the best in the world, I think, on the shoulders of the last defender.
Yeah.
So he'll be hanging on there to Koulibaly.
And as we know, he's
say it.
You know what I'm going to say, so let me say it then.
Say it, referee.
As we know, if South America is losing, he will use his hands in the penalty area to stop them from winning this game. We know that, don't we, from the Ghana game in the World Cup. Well, that's not a grudge, it's true.
Grudge.
Do you think...
take a bite out of a tasty African.
Well, let's forgive him for that. I don't want that kind of thing to hang over him forever, but I do know that he'll stop the goal going in by any means possible.
But conceding a penalty against Ghana, you do want that to hang over him forever.
Well,
But
that, you see, is the mark of a great footballer, that you do absolutely anything to stop the ball going into the net, which is fair enough. Having a chunk out of people is, maybe a psychological problem, whatever it might be, or a medical condition, I don't know. But so I don't want to bring that into play. But nevertheless, I think it's going to be hard for Africa. It's going to be hard for Africa to stop them scoring, Mark.
Yeah, I'm quite impressed with that lineup, and I think it'll be 5-2. We'd probably let in 2.
Koulibaly, you're talking about sticks of barley. for all the good that your defence is going to do against my attacking lineup.
Where's the South American weakness from what you've seen, Mark? Where's their weakness?
Just general demeanour. I think the aging
Is that the best you
fullbacks,
can do? That's the best you can do.
and obviously a very poor coach.
Yeah. Okay. And Tim, where's the African weaknesses? Do you want to start from the back? Start from the back and work your way forward.
They're not going to stay on the field for very long because they're going to go in for some of those lunatic tackles.
But with me as referee, they'll all be on the pitch at the end of the match. Okay. You lot may not be. When you start looking at me as referee and say, "Ref, look, he's a big black guy. I'm a little white guy. Come on, ref." It's not gonna.
I'm a pink toothbrush. You're a blue toothbrush. Why can't we all just get along?
Okay, 4-3-3 versus 4-2-3-1 though. In terms of formation, how do you see that playing out as a chess match?
Well, yeah, I'm a little bit worried about him. If he can get past my line there, my line of three, I'm a little bit worried about what he can do there because my line of three, with the exception of Alexis Sanchez, they're not going to do a great deal of tracking back. They're going to do a fair bit of kind of standing with their hands on their hips, pointing at the others. So he might get numerical superiority. My main worry is he's going to get behind the fullbacks. And if he gets behind the fullbacks with Salah and so on, he can do a little bit of damage there. But and the problem he's going to have is getting the ball off us. I fear if we can keep the ball well, they're not going to be in the races.
I'll tell you what. I'll turn to our listeners. You've heard about the two starting 11s for Tim in South America and Mark in Africa. What do you think the score will be and who's going to win it? You can text me on 85058, email upallnight@bbc.co.uk. Let's speak to Mohammed in Birmingham. Mohammed, good morning.
Hi, morning. Morning, Tim. Morning, Mark. Morning, Dotun.
Hi, mate.
Morning.
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, let's say big fan. I've been listening for about 10 years. So I thought it was about time to call in.
About time, yeah. You say that again.
Yeah. So
well done.
Questions for both Tim and Mark, really. I was thinking about Alexandre Patou the other day, formerly of Milan, and I know now he's in China. I remember something Tim said about 5 years ago. He was plagued by injuries towards the end of his time at Milan, and he moved back to Brazil. And I remember Tim mentioning something about the Brazilian media and the Brazilians always thinking that sports medicine, their recovery and their technology and everything over there was better, so they thought they had a better chance of coming back there. That's part of the reason he moved back to Brazil. I wanted to ask how he's doing now, if he ever did recover, because I assume not, because he's moved to China. And then moving on from there, I wanted to talk about sports medicine in both regions. It's something that's quite interesting to me because I'm a doctor, so it's something that I've always thought about quite a lot. And I know that in Africa, obviously, Mark, you've spoken about the lack of resources, stopping teams doing things that are, travelling and things like that are often restrictions. So I'd like to hear both pundit sides on what they think of sports medicine, recovery technology, and so on. Mina last week was talking about, Clarence Seedorf at Milan having a tooth extracted and becoming 10 times the player. I don't know if that's maybe the case, but I'd like to just hear both pundits' side on what they think of that side of the game.
And Clarence Seedorf may soon become the coach of Oldham Athletic. More of that another time, but Tim first.
There's a long history, and especially in Brazil. And I remember telling Mario Zagallo, who was a player for Brazil at the time, that England went to the 1962 World Cup in Chile without a doctor. And a player nearly died while England were in Chile. And Zagallo, he just couldn't believe it. I think he thought I was lying. But it's the truth. Because Brazil, even before that, 4 years earlier in '58, they had doctors, they had a dentist, they had physical preparation specialists, they even had a sports psychologist. Prematurely, as it proved. And one of the reasons that they in the post-mortem after their failure of 1966, one of the reasons, and there are a number of reasons, but one of them was that the physical preparation specialist, he came from a judo background and not from a football background. Now, this is the time when British football, you didn't have physical preparation specialists. Physical preparation is 2 laps around the pitch and then go and play golf. So they've taken this very, very seriously for a long time. Now, interesting that you mentioned Alexandre Patou and also Milan, because, Milan, they're supposed to have this wonderful laboratory and it's so scientific. But Alexandre Pato, they couldn't get him fit. You know, he kept on breaking down when he was with them. He came back to Brazil, sorted him out, went back to Europe, you know, a little spell in Chelsea, a little spell in Spain. In the end, he thought, well, fair enough, I'm not going to get back in. Looks like I'm not going to get back in the Brazil side, so I'll take money. And he's doing very, very well over there. He's scoring lots of goals in China. There are people beginning to think, well, how about it? You know, maybe if we need a centre forward for the World Cup, well, we could perhaps do a lot worse. Lots of players choose, lots of Brazilian players, when they get injured, they choose to come home. You know, European-based Brazilian. There's another one, another player who's in the national team at the moment, a midfielder called Renato Augusto. Now, you may not have heard of him because he did play in Europe. He played for Bayer Leverkusen. But his big problem there was he just kept on breaking down with injuries. Came back to Brazil, a physiotherapist there who worked with him has sorted him out. He got into Brazil. He's an important player for Brazil. He's now playing in China. He's taken that physiotherapist with him. And he's doing very well. And one of the best players in South American football, the Peruvian centre forward Paulo Guerrero, was in Germany for a decade with Bayern Munich and Hamburg. Kept breaking down, kept getting injured. Came to Brazil, played for Corinthians. He scored the goal for Corinthians when they beat Chelsea in the final of the World Cup. He's now with Flamengo. Doesn't break down anything like as much. And part of this is that the football over here is less physically intense. But also, I think, and certainly the people that know, they tell me that the physiologists, the physiotherapists, the sports doctors, they're still better over here than they are in Europe. And if that's true, I think it's because there's a long tradition of it, and it's something that they've taken seriously for a long time.
What about from an African perspective, Mark?
Look, in South Africa, sports medicine is very highly rated, and it is a sort of a hub for the continent. A lot of people come down here, and in fact, you know, we get a lot of athletes. I suppose a lot of it's got to do also with altitude, which helps with recovery. It also helps, obviously, with training. So there's quite a lot of international visitors who come to sort of benefit from the facilities. But elsewhere in Africa, they use Europe really. The Egyptians are very famous for, you know, if you've got a sore nose, they fly you off to Germany, and the Germans must make an absolute fortune out of Egyptian football players. And obviously the French connection is very strong with the former colonies. And you know, if you're a decent footballer and you've suffered an ACL or something like that, you're more than likely to be put on a plane and sent off to France to have that kind of operation, which tells you a little bit about how sparse some of the facilities are, understandably, in some places around the continent.
Mm. Does that answer your question there, Mohammed?
Yeah, as always, you never fail to deliver. Thanks a lot, guys.
Really appreciate that. Thank you for the call. Make sure it's not 10 years before the next time, because, you know, I'll be an old man by then if you wait that long. Well, when I say I meant really Tim.
If you're not already.
He's been on it for 20 years, you know.
That's the point. That's the point. We're old men already. Yeah, well, you're making happy men very old.
Speak for yourself, mate. Speak for yourself. Mohammed, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Paul, no, my pleasure. Paul says, it's an interesting one, actually. Paul sent a text, says, why do teams have full-backs that are okay going forward but can't defend? He's given the example of Bournemouth, which has got Daniels left-back who scored goal of the month versus Manchester City, but defensively may as well be sat in the stand. Well, why do they do that? Mark first.
Yeah, look, I mean, the propensity these days now to have that sort of high wing-back pushed up high and to have almost, you know, a five-man to make it a five-man defense at times, but basically have the three at the back and the two pushing up, I think is becoming more of a trend in football, and therefore, you know, perhaps the coverage on a defensive side comes from the two or the three that are used in the middle, and that you know, a fullback really these days is not a fullback. He's a wing back, and the younger players who are coming through in that position are players whose ability to bang on forward and to take on defences is much stronger than their ability to defend. I think, you know, the defensive work these days is done by either the two or the three in the middle, and obviously the cover from the defensive midfielders who work so hard. I mean, that's also become a specialist position on its own over the last decade or so. That the ever-running defensive midfielder who's always covering for everyone else who's bombing forward.
Yeah.
But I think fullbacks, when you pick fullbacks these days, you pick them for their attacking ability primarily.
Well, they're virtually wingers though, and that's okay. But
Yeah,
when they're shipping in goals like Bournemouth are at the moment, you want them to stay where they are. You want fullbacks who can actually defend. Is the point that Paul is saying, Tim? You don't want fullbacks bombing forward when you're shipping in goals.
Well, you want a team to defend. It's a collective endeavour, and Mark's made the point. But if you go back 60 years, the old WM formation, basically all football was a succession of 1-against-1 duels. Centre forward is playing against the centre half, and the fullback is playing against the winger. And that's all they did. That was what a fullback did then. He marked the opposing winger. That was all he was supposed to do. And then when you get the invention of the back four, which means that you're pulling an extra player back to the heart of the defence. So you've got that key word, defensive cover. And that means that your fullback doesn't need to defend so well because there's someone to cover. And also, he's got all of this vulnerable space in front of him that he can bomb up, which means that then your team doesn't need to select specialist wingers, and you can pull an extra man into midfield and defend there. And the first two countries to develop really go with the back four, and Brazil invented it, and then Alf Ramsey took it and used it. It's the first two countries to really go all out with attacking fullbacks. And Brazil were the pioneers, but England had one. If you look at especially the 1970 World Cup, unfortunately, Ramsey messed up his substitutions in the heat of Mexico, and the fullbacks, because they had to cover so much ground. They're playing up and down 80 metres all the time. They got tired, and Germany brought on wingers as substitutes. And it ended up discrediting the idea of attacking fullback. And I think it's English football back. It's when we went into the totally flat lines of two flat lines of four that we played for so long, and we're now coming out of. But it all depends on how you want to set up your team. Certainly, you've got all that vulnerable space down the flanks, so why not have a player who can bomb into that space, who's your fullback? Now, clearly, if that's leaving space behind, then there's something wrong there. The team is badly set up because you want your central midfielders or your extra centre-back to provide cover. If that cover is not being provided, it's not necessarily the fault of the fullback if he's being told to bomb forward. It's only the fault of the fullback if the coach is saying to him, look, I want you to stay and hold a defensive line of four. But if you hold a defensive line of four, that only leaves you with 6 players in the opposing half of the field. So it all depends now. Football is no longer a succession of just 1-against-1 duels. It's a constant duel of 11 against 11. Even the goalkeeper is involved now in his distribution. So it all depends on how that team is set up. So if a team is getting into space behind the fullbacks, it may well mean that it's not the fullback's fault, but the player who should be providing cover isn't providing cover.
Paul in Newcastle is suggesting that we have a mix of football phoning and virtual jukebox phoning to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the World Football Phone. Maybe, you never know. Quick fire round, guys. Tim and Mark, always enjoy listening here in Portland, Oregon in the early evening. Have you ever discussed the Portland Timbers' Diego Valeri? Perhaps Tim knows Valeri. Perhaps Tim knows his story. Yeah. He's Argentinian, was held up at gunpoint here once, etc. Yeah, what more can you tell us?
Well, I didn't know that. He's so good that Stevie Winwood wrote a song all about him. Really? Came up through with Lanús. That's not true, actually. It's a coincidence. The Stevie Winwood song called Valerie. He's an elegant playmaker. There were high hopes for him in European football, and Javier Zanetti, the old Inter Milan Argentine, was saying he's going to be a sensation in Europe. And I always have to say I couldn't really see it. One of those playmakers who's just not quite quick enough, doesn't have that acceleration over the first couple of yards. So he went to Europe, didn't really work out.
Sounds like your South American team, Tim.
Yeah, it's full of players who've never done anything in Europe, like Lionel Messi and Alexis Sanchez.
Don't worry, we're not done with that yet. Okay, we're not done with that yet. We'll come back to that soon. Yeah, go on.
But it seems to me that type of player, that the Argentine playmaker who's not quite good enough to really shine in Europe, is the type of player who's doing exceptionally well in the United States. And certainly Diego Valeri seems to fit into that category.
Oh, I get it. The Stevie Winwood. I finally got it. Anyway, he was held up at gunpoint.
Any day this week.
I know. Eventually I'll get there. He was held up at gunpoint, recruited into the MLS and the Timbers, loves it here, takes his wife and kids to the women's team games and happily signs autographs, poses for selfies, has helped recruit others, and at 31 has scored 9 games in a row and is in the prime of his life at hopefully the right time for the MLF playoffs, says Tony. This one for you, Mark, from Sean. Which region of Africa do you consider to have been the most successful over the years of club football? Club football, that is.
North Africa by far. That's got to be the easiest question of the night. They win all the time. It's very rare that a side south of the Sahara wins one of the or wins the Champions League or the other big annual African club competition.
And which country in the north, out of interest?
Egypt in particular, Tunisia second, and then the Moroccans and the Algerians make an occasional appearance. But Egypt and Tunisia are the hotbeds of club football on the continent.
Jay, Tony and Ali say, thanks for the many, many hours of entertainment. We've been listening for about 10 years now. I'd like to ask a question of Tim and Mark. We saw Timo Werner being substituted for RB Leipzig due to breathing difficulties. Later it was discovered that it was due to the crowd being too loud and he couldn't handle the atmosphere. So I'm presuming it was something of a panic attack. It was the first time we'd heard such a thing happening and wanted to know if this had happened before in your respective regions or if you know of any instances where the crowd or atmosphere had directly affected a player, whether it be for good or bad. Anything you can think about, Tim?
Well, there are a number of occasions when the intimidating atmospheres have really, really got to players. But I wasn't aware of that was the reason for the Timo Werner story. That's a fabulous story that just shows how much football takes place in that social context. How much, the big difference between cinema and football is that, if you go to watch a film, it's the same film, no matter if you're there on your own or if you're there in a full house. But the fans, they have a direct effect on what happens out there on the field. And that story, that Timo Werner story, is such a wonderful example of how fans are participants and not spectators.
Yeah, and what about...
And that game was in Istanbul, Beşiktaş, so it's certainly... To me, that makes it a place to really put on your bucket list. I mean, having read that in the week earlier and seen quite a bit of copy on that, sort of made up my mind. I'd really like to go and have a look at one of those games, preferably one of those derbies with Beşiktaş or Galatasaray or Fenerbahce. They must be incredible. If that's that's the impact it has on a player who's not only a German national team player and did so well with Leipzig in the Bundesliga last season, but is also tipped as one of the top 5 future stars of world football.
A long one from John, but I'm going to try and abbreviate it.
Sorry, if I may answer the African aspect
of
that.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I just want to mention that the panic attack is a future event. It's going to happen to 11 South American footballers when they take on the best of the African.
Don't worry. I said we'll get onto that. We've got 20 minutes left.
There's quick fire away.
He can't resist it. We'll get there in a moment. I promise you. We'll get there in a moment.
See, he's walking out of his technical area. This coach, he can't stay in his technical area.
He's going to be sent off. He's going to be sent off into the stands. But hold on, because guess what, Mark? Whilst we've been talking real football on air, Tim has been playing with Twitter. I'll come back to that conversation in a moment or two. You know what I'm talking about, Vickery, there in the back. Oh, this one.
I don't really.
No, you will do. You will do. John says, question for Mark. The last time Mark was on, I believe it was the last time at least, that he spoke about Jose Mourinho's history of getting the most out of players from Africa, at least in comparison to other contemporary European coaches. However, Mourinho didn't seem to think much of Mo Salah when he was brought into Chelsea. I remember that it was Mourinho himself who wanted Salah at Chelsea after the Egyptian scored against the London club in the Champions League whilst playing for Basel. Well,
yeah, look, he didn't think much of Lukaku either, and look what he's doing.
Well,
right
exactly.
Now.
That's a good point, actually.
And he didn't think much of the best player in the Premier League at the moment, in my opinion, Kevin De Bruyne. So
yeah. Although, hang on, John ain't dead. John ain't done yet. He says the players of African origin who have performed best under Mourinho have come from West Africa, whether it be Ghana, Ivory Coast, or Nigeria. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, look, I think that's all coincidental. I mean, I don't think Mourinho picks them for anything else. They're footballing.
No.
I mean, the point we were making was about Eric Bailly the other day. I think that Africans have worked well with him. But
the point John's making, which is quite an interesting one, if I might just finish, Mark, is there perhaps any major cultural differences between North African and West African players that would impact a player's relationship with a European coach or the fans or the lifestyle? And he says the same question to Tim as well. Do certain regions of South America, for example, and Brazil in particular, given its vast size, harbour cultural elements that make moving abroad more or less difficult? Let's take Tim first, and I'll come back to you on the back of that one, Mark, if that's all right, Tim.
Yeah, I think the Brazilians tend to find it harder than some of the other nationalities. Obviously, this is a huge generalisation.
Yes.
And part of the reason for that is it's quite a closed culture, and also the players perhaps can be a little bit spoilt, and it can be hard for them to be dealt with. If they consider themselves as special talents, to be dealt with as kind of one of the group. They'll be looking for a special privilege here, and there are even things about in like Brazilian football, as like the big star player will consider like taking a throw on to be beneath him. The aspect of hierarchy is very, very important here. And you go to Europe, and there's less of that hierarchy, or the player is joining at a place where his place on the hierarchy is lower. Some of them can find that a little bit hard to take. There are also differences of the way that the football is played, and the criteria that fouls that they're not given and that they'd expect to get back home, or just the fact that the football is different. The football is much quicker, and it's just so much more compact. And you look at a Brazilian game these days, the defensive lines, that they just play more or less on top of the goalkeeper. So there's just so much space on the field, between the two defensive lines. Whereas in Europe, the defensive lines play much, much higher on the field. So you have to know what you're going to do with the ball much, much quicker than you. So there are things to adapt to on the field. There are also things to adapt to off the field. And especially for the ones who come over very young, there's that thing. I hate this, and I think it's counterproductive on so many occasions when they're loaned out. Like Chelsea buy them or someone else buy them, and they loan them out somewhere else. And the player can end up really, really feeling lost then, because it will be hard enough for him at the age that he's at and the educational level that he's frequently at. It will be hard enough for him to adapt to the club that have bought him, but he's being loaned out to a club that have no long-term interest in him and don't really care how he gets on. That can be really, really hard, and so many careers lose momentum because of that reason.
You see, it was quite a fulsome answer for a gross generalisation. I'm expecting Africa to equal that, Mark.
No, I would like to ditto most of that, but I would say I'd be very reluctant to sort of pigeonhole North Africans as a bit tougher than West Africans or vice versa. I think these are individuals with all of their own their own makeup, their own needs, their own social and educational backgrounds, and I think they differ all completely, as all individuals do, and it's whether they're from West or North Africa makes very little difference. I think Tim's point about the Brazilian culture, I think you could possibly say that in North Africa they come from a bit more of a sort of a footballing structure where they've had a bit more of a formative training, which is perhaps not the case in West Africa. And you could also suggest the generalisation that West Africans are a little bit hungrier, steelier. They're there because it's not only an opportunity for them to play football and make some money, but they're there in a sense almost to feed a village. A lot of those players have massive family commitments back home, and are the breadwinners for several others. So there's that whole aspect which I think is fairly unique, perhaps to players from Africa south of Sahara rather than north of Sahara.
It's a really important point, really good point. Personally, I'd rather feed a village than feed a hairdressing salon, but let's leave that to one side. What's been the reception in Nigeria? What's been the reception in Nigeria? Okay, Tim. Alex wants to know, what's been the reception in Nigeria regarding Tammy Abraham's decision not to declare for the Super Eagles?
Well, at the moment, not much, and I think the reason for that is because they're so pumped up at the moment in Nigeria with having beaten Cameroon at home 4-0 in that World Cup qualifier, and basically being 7 days away from being the first African side to claim their place at the World Cup. I mean, they should do it next weekend when they host Zambia, and they'll do it with a game to spare. So I think they're not particularly worried at the moment. But were they to be in the doldrums, there would have been a fair amount to have been said about that. But the Anglo-Nigerian footballer, and there have been a few now who've played for the Super Eagles, and there's now one or two Germans and Dutch. And I use that with a small G and a small D. They're also Nigerian citizens, half German, half Dutch, half Nigerian, who've got into the national side. And beside Victor Moses, who is Nigerian born but British, but brought up in Britain, they haven't really made the impact that perhaps had been hoped for. So I don't think Nigerians look across to the European continent as a sort of a ready source of decisive players are going to make a decisive impact on their national team, as perhaps the French countries like Senegal and Mali do. They spend, and Morocco and Algeria in particular, they spend all their time scouting around Europe looking for players of African descent to put in their national sides. I'm not sure the Nigerians are that hung up on that route, that source for their footballers just yet.
This is from Alex, Tim. Can you ask Tim how the Brazilians in Russia and Ukraine get along socially and culturally in these countries, specifically at Shakhtar Donetsk? I know they've had a large contingent of Brazilians there for many years. I used to love watching Fernandinho there. I've been thinking about this since the Champions League game, Donetsk hosting Napoli. After Talson scored for Donetsk, the way that he celebrated with Dario Serna was very touching to me. He was visibly weeping and gave Dario multiple kisses, slow and meaningful, on the forehead and face. He seemed genuinely moved by the occasion. Sorry for the long email.
Yeah, well, I think that they create their own little false Brazil there, and there are lots of them. And they've had a coach on, if it was Lucescu, the Romanian, who learnt Portuguese, in order, and Romanian is a Latin language anyway, so I don't think it was that hard for him. And I think they've got a Portuguese coach now, so they've got an environment. I remember when William was there, now of Chelsea, seeing him being interviewed on Brazilian TV, and he was talking about his life there, and it just sounded like little Brazil. He spent most of his time. If he was with his teammates, it was with his Brazilian teammates. If he was off, he was watching Brazilian TV there, or he was on the internet with his mates back in São Paulo. So they'd managed to, and technology these days allows you to do that. What has been impressive, I think, with the way that club has run its affairs, is that it seems to have been able to do that without dividing the dressing room. It seems that they've managed to bring everyone along together. And that can be a problem. We've already seen just little signs of the problem, the egos and the national lines in Paris Saint-Germain with Neymar arriving. That's something which I'm sure can be smoothed out. But there's something there's always the possibility of a problem there if you get a nucleus of players from the same country. But it looks, from the outside anyway, that Shakhtar have been really successful at being able to have a nucleus of Brazilians without without causing a big rift in the dressing room.
Yeah, should we talk about this conversation you've been having on Twitter with Anand regarding the South American 11 versus Mark's ragged troop of African 11s? And you and Anand have been having, right old laugh. And I see here that Anand says that the referee...
No, he's on your side.
Is he on my side?
He's on your side, yeah.
Well,
he thinks you're going to win.
Yeah. And he does say that the referee will allow a few kicks and he'll react and get red cards. Oh, that's Neymar, yeah. The ref will allow Neymar to showboat, but then Dotun Adebayo will allow a few kicks and then he'll react and get a red card. Yeah, that's fair enough.
And you said you're going to get you're going to send off both Casemiro and Arturo Vidal, who just stick their names. Let me just stick their names in my book in advance. How do you spell that, Casemiro? All right, but you spell it B-I-A-S-E-D, new word R-E-F.
Yeah. Well,
but I told you, it doesn't matter. You know, he can send 3 off and we'll beat him with 8. There's no problem.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's interesting. Good to know. This is for you, Mark. Who do you fancy going through? Who do you fancy going through from Group D? This is from Dave, who says, would be grand if Burkina Faso was to qualify for the World Cup.
Yeah, it would be, but I think Senegal will qualify. I think South Africa will beat Burkina Faso this coming weekend and next weekend in Johannesburg, and basically deflate those hopes. And I think Senegal ultimately are the best side in the group.
Mm. And also, this is from Miguel, who says, best skill to get past defenders one-on-one. Mbappe's ball roll in the build-up to Neymar's goal was simple, but with his pace,
stunning,
so effective, says Miguel.
He's on our bench, by the way, Mbappe. Cameroon.
You can't have him.
Too late, Tim, too late. Do you want to describe it for us, Tim, this ball roll?
No, go and look at it on YouTube or something. It is sensational, and to have the coldness to be able to produce it at that point, that place on the pitch. I remember talking to Mario Zagallo about Pelé, and he said that Pelé he had the coldness to do things that other great players could do them on the halfway line. Yeah. Pelé could do it inside the penalty area, and Mbappe had a little bit of that. And at the age that he's at, he's just absolutely terrifying.
David says, unfortunately, I really managed to listen live, but podcasts are the thing I'm waiting for on a Saturday. I've got a question for Legendino about João Saldana. I read the book when I was younger called Pelé Garrincha Football by a Russian journalist whose name can't remember. In the book, it was presented as if Saldana did a good job with Brazil, only Zagallo to be given then the team to take to 1970 World Cup. It would be great if Legendino could shed light on the whole situation. Why was he let go? Thank you in advance.
Yeah, he's a fascinating character, João Saldana, especially and he was a communist who was appointed the national team coach at the height of Brazil's right-wing military dictatorship. So it's a very strange idea. It was a brilliant idea to appoint him. It was one of the idea of João Havelange, who was, he has his detractors, lots of detractors, and for good reasons. But there was a bit of intelligence about him. Brazil were in such a mess at the time, and that they'd had 44 players picked for the 1966 World Cup. And one of the problems that they had was that the football was developing beyond Rio and Sao Paulo. So every other region, they're all pushing for their players. No, we want the players from our region to get picked. And other, as I understand, happens sometimes in Nigerian football. So the national team were in a mess. And Saldana, who wasn't really a coach, he was a journalist. He'd had a brief experience coaching, but he wasn't really a coach. But the big advantage of having him as a coach, he was a strong man, and he just walked in, first press conference, and he said, well, my first team is this, and my reserves are this. He just ended all of that political debate straight up. Picked a very attacking 4-2-4 team. World Cup qualification in those days was a breeze, and the opposition were weak. Brazil walked through them all, got their confidence back. But a couple of things. He was a little bit unstable, Saldana. He liked a bit of a drink, and he liked to wave his gun around, which is not laudable at all. But he also fell out with Pelé. He was saying that Pelé had a problem with his vision. It looks to me as if he was kind of perhaps looking for a way out. And I also don't think that 4-2-4 that they used in the very open, very attacking that they'd used in qualification, I don't think they'd have won the World Cup that way. So he got sacked, or as the phrase was, his technical commission was dissolved. And Saldana famously said, I'm not ice cream to be dissolved, so I'm walking. And Zagallo came in, and Zagallo made really important changes to the team. He doesn't get enough credit for this. Really important changes. There was no place for Rivellino in the original team. Zagallo found one. There was no place for Clodoaldo in the original team. Zagallo found one. And that team is really a pioneer of today's kind of 4-2-3-1. So Zagallo gets some stick because he's seen as the bad right winger and Saldana is the good left winger, which is a simplification. But Saldana was great for getting unqualified, and Zagallo was great for winning it.
Okay, talking of communism, which you mentioned there, Michael in Middlesbrough says, with the concept of socialism very much back on the agenda of UK politics, or at least there was a Labour Party conference in Brighton earlier this week, are there any footballers or managers in your respective regions who subscribe to a socialist philosophy, and does it have any impact on their careers or their football at all? Mark, in Africa?
Well, we've had it's more in line with the contemporary political changes on the African continent, particularly with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. But one of the greats of African football, Mohamed Abu Trika, has been a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. As you know, their leadership was in charge after the revolution, but then deposed again by the military, and they've all been locked up now. And Abu Trika's, at one stage there was an arrest warrant out for him earlier this year. He'd been in exile in elsewhere in the Gulf. But he's probably the most visible African over there, and he's taken a very big stand. He was in his playing days as well. He was often fined for he'd have some sort of message of support for Palestine and other various African and Arabic causes on T-shirts so that he'd lift up when he scored. So he's always been a very strong political figure on a continent in which it's very rare that footballers actually do stand up and use their celebrity to fight for causes.
But given the communist, love and desire for sporting achievement, you'd have thought Angola, Mozambique during the 70s would have been the powerhouse of African football, but they weren't.
Yeah, but they surprisingly poor from the communist era. And they're still living on the glories of the colonial era. The greatest African footballers include Eusebio and Mario Coluna, who were both Mozambicans, but who played for Portugal, and they came from the colonial era. And they're celebrated more and more these days, which is a great irony. They never ever played for the independent. There was one player, his name escapes me for a moment now, but he played for Benfica and he played for Porto. And he played for Portugal, and then he went and when Angola became independent, he decided to go and back and play for Angola. I can see his face in my mind now, but his name escapes me for the moment. But he was probably the one who took a stand at the time of independence and sort of went to play for the country.
Just let me say very quickly, Tim, faces on your mind doesn't work for radio, but you tell me from a South American perspective, socialism, politics, anybody?
Strongest in Argentina, where there's that working class trade union left wing tradition. Menotti, who won the World Cup in '78 when Argentina had a military dictatorship, is a left wing figure. Edgardo Bauza, who recently coached the Argentine national team, is in the Middle East at the moment. He's another one from that kind of left wing stroke Peronist tradition. So stronger in Argentina, I think, a little bit in Uruguay than elsewhere in the continent.
What does Tim think of these South American team with Filol, Leandro, Perfumer, Passarella, Everaldo, Piazza, Gallagio, Maradona, Cubillas, Zico, Kempes, says Stephen Birmingham very quickly?
Yeah, I wouldn't have Everaldo in there at left back, but apart from that, I think it's very strong
Tim,
indeed.
Thanks very much.
BBC 5 Live.